Pete Gosar.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it, Jeremy.
So we're going to get right into it. Let's talk economy. What would you say is next for the state's economy, and what will you do to help Wyoming get there?
Well, we have to have a transition from the traditional extractive industries and move them into the market. The market's asking for a lower emission-based fuel source, and our traditional extractive industries can meet that. As the son of an oil field worker, my dad would have never envisioned what they can do with the oil industry today. And I think that when you don't focus on moving your industries and adapting and innovating, then you set yourself with a real uncertain future. And that's why I worry about Wyoming today. We spent some money in the university, but we really haven't paired that with the future. And I think about the lithium-ion battery factory that Tesla and Elon Musk are searching for a place to put it. And I know Sweetwater County has this huge lithium field, and it needs soda ash to refine lithium. And there it is, 20, 30 miles away. And so here's an opportunity to take an extractive industry, use the Rock Springs uplift to do the carbon sequestration, which is expensive. But if you're extracting lithium at the same time, now here's an opportunity to bridge from our extractive industries, make them relevant in the future, and then move yourself to a new industry in the future.
Maybe this goes hand in hand because of the topic, but what do you consider the biggest problem that needs solving in this state, and what would you do as governor to take leadership on it?
I think we just talked about it. From the time I was a little kid, it's been the same. Diversify the economy, and we find Wyoming finds itself in my age, some 40 years later, in the exact same spot. Traditionally the same amount of revenues from the same three extractive industries, and we need to find a way to change that. And so, I think that there needs to be a discussion, an honest discussion. I think that when somebody says the war on coal and then doesn't come with a solution, well, that doesn't lead people to have an idea that there's an innovative way going forward. And I think that Wyoming people can handle that. I've been through 3 boom and busts in my lifetime, at least, before I was 18. I think people in Wyoming can understand difficult conversations and an understanding that we need to make our traditional industries fit in the new economy, and they can. But then we also need to diversify. The one thing that I think that is not covered in depth is energy efficiency. A dollar saved is the exact same thing as a dollar earned, and the return on investment is great. You look at the Empire State Building; it's just undergone a multi-million-dollar refurbishing, and not because for some compliance with EPA regulations or any other reason, other than it makes good sense and a good return on investment. And I think, how can we extend that to our municipal buildings, our cities, counties, school buildings, and say, we're going to use this money more efficiently, and then maybe we have more money for water mains and sewer pipes and the infrastructure that we desperately need in Wyoming.
Just sort of take on from that. So Governor Meade recently has taken a shift, you could say, in how he talks about climate change, saying that he doesn't personally believe it, but he thinks that we need to be sensitive to feelings on it elsewhere, since those are our customers. What do you think of that position shift, and how does that differ from your feelings on the matter?
Well, I think it's a shift in the right direction. However, when I hear the term skeptical, I would wonder where the empirical evidence that the governor is using to be skeptical. I think in this country, when we stop believing experts, we're in a real tough spot. And I welcome his shift on it. I would say it's a little late to the game, but I'm glad he's there, because I'm glad he's recognizing that the markets are saying the emissions are something that we need to deal with. And I think by the focusing on the war on coal of the EPA, it takes our eye off the ball to innovate, to find a way forward. This can be done, and it can be done in Wyoming. I think the money spent, maybe trying to move a coal port through Oregon or Washington, where there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of support for that, and we're going to need that support. Maybe we should spend that time and effort and money making Wyoming folks and industry and people in higher ed work on making our traditional industries a part of the future. And I think they can be done. And I just harken back to that oil discussion that I've had with my dad. He would have never thought that they could drill miles and miles horizontally underground. But they did, and people innovated it. And I think that that's possible in coal, too.
And yet there's certainly been money allocated by the legislature for the governor to take a leadership role on lawsuits against the federal government, specifically the EPA, on promoting coal exports and traveling to the coal ports and meeting with people. Is that something that you wouldn't do?
Well, I think you have to take calculated risks, and you have to weigh the odds of that being successful. And so I think that there's a place for, a partnership with industry and the power plants and those companies that run that. Because, I think if they're not willing to invest, then maybe you're a good steward of the public dollar, and you need people to be engaged. And if those companies are not willing to invest, I don't think that it's a good investment for Wyoming's folks. And so I think that that's an opportunity to have what we talk about a lot, the public partnerships, and move forward. And this is a conversation that people in Wyoming can have. I'm not cynical, even though maybe 2 out of every 3 disagree with me ideologically. I'm not cynical about that. I think people can handle this. I think an honest and high-level discussion, we can have that in Wyoming, and I think that they'll appreciate that and an honest perspective about it.
So you talk about people disagreeing with you. This is certainly a question that isn't going to get asked to the Republicans. You're a Democrat.
Right.
What lessons do you take away from Dave Friedenthal's term in office and his run as you run and want to administrate? What do you, and working with a lot of Republicans, what do you take away from that?
Well, I think that Wyoming is not so ideologically driven as many other places in the United States. And so I think that you look a person in the eye, you tell them the same thing in Gillette that you share with them in Laramie or Jackson or anywhere in between. I think that there's an authenticity about the message. And then if you can explain the reasons that you believe the things that you do, I think you get a comfort level with folks who say, you know what, I might disagree on this or that. And I think there's plenty in my party that'll disagree with some of the positions I hold. But here's an honest broker. Here's somebody we can deal with. Here's somebody who's going to sit at the table and go for a solution. And I think overall, politics has become about the next election. And quite honestly, as a voter, I'm tired of that because nothing ever gets solved if it's all about the next election. And I think that if you run for governor and you're fortunate enough to win, you should solve some things or really make an attempt at it. And if you get reelected, well, great, then you did a nice job. But if you didn't, at least you went out there saying, this has gone on too long in Wyoming, and we're going to take a real big effort at it, and maybe we'll just get it done.
So talk about some of those solutions, and let's talk about some of those opportunities. Now, you've already talked about some possibilities with energy efficiency, bringing in some new industries, public-private partnerships. What has been missed in the Meade administration that you'd want to take advantage of, or that you think the state needs to move forward on?
Well, I think education. I talk about education quite a bit. The best money spent for me is in early childhood ed. Unrealized potential is a waste. And I think if you get a 5-year-old who can't read through no fault of their own, then they don't have the opportunity to realize their potential. And we had a perfect opportunity to spend some of our surplus money during the administration to start a comprehensive early childhood program. Who knows if the young girl on the Wind River Reservation has the key to cancer? All we have to do is help her to learn to read, and there we have something that's remarkable. And so I think about early childhood ed. Quite honestly, what happened with the science standards in the budget footnote. I'm embarrassed for those people who pushed that through and for the governor to sign that. We don't censor science in Wyoming. You don't censor a person's education. And it's not like we can stop the internet at the state borders. And it's really short-sighted. We're going to have engineers. We're going to have scientists to solve some of our problems, to move our industries to the future. we're going to have those people be, as equipped as they can and as competitive as they can, and to do something that just reeked of political opportunism is something that, we can't continue to do much in Wyoming anymore. It's a global world, and people move in and out of our state, and our kids have to compete. And so I would focus on a few parts of education and do them well. I think that you make it simple enough and you make it straightforward enough, and then you do things well. And when that's done, you move forward.
So give me more detail on that, because obviously between Common Core and the next generation science standards, you've got plenty of things that a lot of people are upset about. And frankly, there's an alphabet soup of improvement programs for education, both from within the state and from the feds. What do you do with education, and how do you take a leadership role in that as governor to try to better education in Wyoming?
Well, I think that there's a lot of disagreement based on misinformation. I think many people believe that the Common Core is a federally mandated program, and that's just not true. Those were state governors and chief executives of their education department getting together with some of the best and say, what, industry says our kids aren't ready to meet the needs. And that was the reason for the Common Core. And by and large, the teachers I meet with in large percentages in Wyoming, they think that this is a nice way to get the conversations between math and English that had sometimes been siloed going. And it recognizes that kids move in and out of states and classrooms from time to time. And so I think that there's an opportunity to have that discussion. With the next generation science standards, there was that opportunity again. Once again, we had 30 science educators throughout Wyoming, from K through 12, large, medium, and small districts. Some of the best professors we have at the university and the community college said, what, not only are these the best science standards we've ever seen, they're the best standards we've ever seen. And there was no state governments, no federal governments involved in those. Those were scientists and educators saying, we've had a slide in our standings internationally in science. And this is our best attempt to arrest that slide and move in another direction. And it focused on, the way I like to learn science, and I think the way that people learn science the best, with experimentation, the scientific method. And then it put in an engineering piece that said, now that you know the outcome of your experiment, engineer a solution. And I think in my the being a teacher and being a pilot, those are the things that really matter. I think that being able to adjust and adapt and innovate in the world, they can't really cover completely what happens to an airplane when you lose an engine. You have to be able to adapt. You have to be able to think, and you have to be able to do that in a calm manner. And so I think it was really, something that we really missed the opportunity. And I think the state board in last week's memorandum said, what, we're not going to continue in science unless everything can be, considered. You just can't take the best off the board and think that you can come away with science standards that are prepare kids for the future. And I think that was a real strong statement. And I think that maybe we need to have that discussion. We need an executive who goes out there and says, what, we put a lot of money and a lot of time in these districts into the Common Core, and our teachers, by and large, support it. What happens if we don't? If we stop this? What happens to that money? What do we tell education? They're desperate out, the people that I talk to up and down Wyoming in the education field, to say, we have to settle on something. Consistency is what's going to make a good education system. If we keep moving the bar, we're not going to be able to get kids where they need to be. And so I think the chief executive can really do a nice job going around and explaining and saying, this is why it's important. And for me, education is the future and something we really need to be good at.
How do you feel about where the Cindy Hill situation is right now? And what would you have done differently as governor throughout the discussions on Senate File 104 and since?
Yeah. You always hope that, what you say won't be judged as Monday morning quarterbacking. And I think that my record would prove it. I wouldn't have signed that bill. I really wouldn't have. I did not vote for Superintendent Hill. In fact, I supported her opponent. He's a friend of mine, and I thought much more qualified. However, I don't believe that was the correct set of actions. If there was some impeachable offense, well, there was something in the Constitution already, in the powers that they had to impeach Superintendent Hill. But to strip the office and to make the office hollow is how I view it. I think was a bit too far, and I think many people in Wyoming agree. If we need to change that office, and the Ferrari report of the 80s and 90s said, maybe we ought to consider that, put it out to the folks, put it out as a constitutional amendment. Tell people how you want to change the office and let them vote on it. And I think by and large people would have said, well, you know what, however that vote turned out, at least I had my say. And for me, I felt like, Superintendent Hill won fair and square. And to not to hollow that out left people thinking, what, can our election results just be undone? And so I thought it was an overreach, and I think that I'd call for the full repeal if I'm elected governor. If we need to change it, well, let's change it, but let's change it the right way.
And for you, that would be bringing it forward for a vote.
You bet. You bet it would be, and I'm not convinced that that needs to be changed. I would like to see that discussion. I think it's there are states that have it as where the governor appoints that education executive, and then there are other states that don't, and so I'm not sure that it needs to be changed. But if the people of Wyoming think it needs to be changed, well, let's do that. Let's let them weigh in on it. And there's good reasons on either side. But I think that maybe it's not the office, maybe it's the person we put in the office that needs to be changed, and maybe we need to have a better discussion about straight party line voting that says, let's go and get the most qualified person for the job. And I think that maybe 2010 was a shining example of why that matters.
Well, let's talk about threats. In this case, revenue threats. So you talked about abilities, or the industry's ability to innovate, and that's undeniable. However, will that be enough to cover what would undeniably be a funding shortfall if you're seeing significant drops in demand for coal, oil? How do you replace that?
Well, and I think that's the $1 million question, and I think by focusing on the war mentality that we'll just sue and that'll change everything. I don't believe that's the case. I don't really believe you can sue your way to success. You get to innovate. You get to find a way forward. Wyoming's blessed with not only coal, natural gas, and oil, but solar, wind, renewables. We could lead in energy efficiency. I think about the opportunity with Medicaid expansion. Here was $865 million of investment coming to our state. When you put the multiplier of those dollars into 3 or 4 times, which is a conservative figure, you're talking billions of dollars. Who's to say that Wyoming can't figure out how to deliver health care to rural populations? I know there are folks in Wyoming today, Wyoming citizens, born and raised in Wyoming, who are doing medical things completely different than they've been done before. And we need to have that discussion. We need to have faith that Wyoming people can come up with solutions. And so I think that, you do have to diversify. And it might be uncomfortable. But when I listen to the administration say my plan is to continue to sue for the war on coal, that's my A, B, and C plan, I think that's pretty reckless. I think that you should always have a backup plan. I think that's your job, is to say this is where the future is headed, I think. And we're going to try to do the best we can with our traditional industries, and who knows? I don't believe you should count any person or any idea or anybody's ability out. But you should also prepare and say, what, Mr. Musk, how do we get that lithium-ion factory here? What do we do? Because I know Texas really wants it. I know Nevada's really wants it, and Arizona really would like to have that. And here we are, I think to myself, we have the lithium, we have the soda ash. They're right on a major interstate. Why aren't we talking about it? Because that's a multi-billion-dollar plant. And what else comes along with something like that? You have parts makers and you have spin-offs that now you're into the game, and it's not like one company has an electric car. It's not like Tesla's the only electric car. All of them have it, and I just saw Harley Davidson announce last week. They're talking about an electric motorcycle that they're taking out to 30 different towns and cities around the country. And you have to think to yourself, this is going to be part of the future. And we have to hustle and get that. And we have the opportunity, I think, to. But we're going to have to hustle. And we're going to have to say, this is important to us as a state. And, I'm not sure, that we should be able to pick winners and losers. We should say, here's a plan. And we're going to go with it, and we're going to explain to people why it's our plan. And I think that has an opportunity to marry a future for our traditional industries with the carbon sequestration piece, and then a bridge to the new industries with the lithium-ion battery. And I think it's a perfect example of how we need to think and the importance of thinking that way.
So let's talk about picking the winners and losers. And speaking of the rhetorical devices, that's one you commonly hear in terms of providing state support for industries or some sort of incentive to encourage an industry to come to the state. Would you be saying that you're not supportive of that in any way, or
oh no?
What sort of incentives are you comfortable with and you look favorably on in your role as governor?
Well, I think that the Wyoming Business Council has done a nice job of bringing industry from outside the state, and then that's I hope not to construe that at all as something I'm against. However, I think that we could do some more work at home. I think that there's some mom and pops in some of these small towns who could use a little expertise, who could use a little bit an opportunity to have access to capital that they might not have. I know as a small business owner, it's all I can do to do the business that I have. I don't have a lot of expertise in marketing. I don't know how to move my product into the regional area or the national area, and I think I'm not alone in that struggling. And so I think that those things are already in place. There's a market research center that very few people in Wyoming know about. And I think it could be more proactive. I think they could go into these communities and say, hey, who's doing good stuff? Who's producing a good or service? And ask them, what can we help you to do? How do we make you better? And then I think that an investment in infrastructure is long overdue. I think that our towns and cities need to have that. I think that when you stop investing in your people and your infrastructure, then if you're a company or an organization or a state, well, then you're kind of leaving yourself with not much of a future. You don't see those in all the successful companies, the Googles and the Apples. They continually reinvest. And so I think that by stuffing money in these coffee cans, the colloquial coffee cans, in places that return a fraction of a percent of interest, well, maybe it's time to start investing in folks and in our infrastructure, and I'm pretty sure the return will be great.
So this is actually my next question. So
Okay.
let's talk about it. Let's talk about some of that money in the coffee cans. Where would you, and not that you get to just make a unilateral decision,
Right.
But where would you spend that? And where you talk about infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure are we talking about?
Well, I think that, first and foremost, I see the monies to the municipalities, and there's 175 million in this last biennium. But of that, is 350,000 is renewable grant or energy efficiency grant match. Well, that doesn't go very far in a county courthouse. That does a couple. I'd like to see that, multiplied many times over, because and make it a grant opportunity. Some cities and towns will take you up on it. Some won't, and that's fine. But what the return on the investment pays off in 10 years or less, and you think to yourself, well, that's money well spent, because once that return on investment is complete, now that's just savings every year. That's more firefighters. That's more water lines, and those are things that need to be done smartly. I think about where I live now today. Laramie. There was a downtown that was at a crossroads a few years back, and they started to reinvest in the downtown, and things that I thought might be a a waste of money, like the mural projects. Well, they proved me wrong, because they've added a new twist to our downtown, and now it's become a hub, and a place where you don't see much retail space open. You see a vibrant marketplace on Fridays if you go down there, and people come to take pictures of the murals, and then they have dinner, and they shop. And so I think that there's a real need to invest in local downtowns again, and say, you know what, this is important. The infrastructure is already here. We need to save it.
Any other questions? Dave? Well, so in closing, because we're kind of wrapping up, in closing, what would you like to say? Do you have anything you'd like to add, and then maybe to sort of frame that, why you?
Well, it's a great question, and you oftentimes feel in the rooms that you're in that there are experts much better in many of the topics you talk about. But I think that that's not the key to be the smartest and the most knowledgeable in carbon sequestration if you're governor. It's to know those folks and say, it's really important that you get engaged and that you help us solve this, and that you take time. Maybe you leave the private sector and you come help the executive and say, what, Wyoming's really needs its best and its brightest right now, and we need to solve some of these things, and we could use you. And so I think that there's an opportunity to have an honest discussion, and I think that if you talk about the future, you should act like the future, and you do that. Our website is based on video. We spend a lot of time in social media and marketing in that way, and that's a perfect opportunity to connect those long spaces in Wyoming. And I think there's a great opportunity to understand and to employ that. All my media is done in Laramie, Wyoming. My websites are designed in Laramie, Wyoming, and it has an opportunity because we're so proximate to the university to have those opportunities. But I think that can be moved out to other places. And so, it's a great question, Jeremy, because, I'm pretty certain there are much more talented people in Wyoming. In fact, I've met them all the time. But you think to yourself, well, I'm going to hustle. I'm going to find those people, and I'll talk to them and say, what, it's time. And I think that having grown up in the West, in a very conservative part of the state, and now living in the East of Wyoming, there's a difference. But I think that there's a commonality also. That people want to solve things once and for all. They want to work on the gender-based wage inequality. They want to work on worker safety in Wyoming. They want to make education in Wyoming the best it can be. And you know what? We have the opportunity in that field and many others to be the best. And we have a population that's relatively small. We have resources that we've put into education. I'm not sure why we couldn't be the best. I'm not sure why we couldn't compete with the Massachusetts. And so they said, what are they doing in Wyoming? What's the Wyoming model? And we start exporting those type of industries and expertise. And I think that as a 7th of 10 kids or a walk-on at the University of Wyoming, you understand it's a process. I've been 8th string before. And ultimately your goal is to hit the field. But the first step is to get to 7th string. And then once that happens, you get to 6th string. And so there's a process, I think, and there's a process in government. And I hope to bring that expertise, the willingness to compete, the willingness to innovate, and the willingness to embrace things that are not well known to me. Because I think that's how we change Wyoming. And I think that's how we diversify it. And that's how we ensure a future for this state.
Gosar, thank you for visiting us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.